We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and I'm Bill Correll. We've been doing this now for 162 episodes. Can you believe it? I can't. The time's gone by so quickly, and we've had so many great conversations. Well, before I move on, I want to just also introduce my co-host here, who is my dear friend Jan Jeremias, who I really look forward to spending this time with all week long. And when we get on here, I think it's pretty obvious to you guys, but I just want to acknowledge her. What a great gal she is, a great human being, and what a great friend. So obviously, I'm feeling a little bit better, aren't I?
Sounds it, Bill. Sounds it.
Yes, and we're a little late for the Blarney from St. Patrick's Day, but I also want to let you know I'd rather oversell on the friendship and have you know that it's on my mind than for me to not tell you. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, I do.
It's kind of interesting. I live in cliche stories. That's what I traffic in. And one of my favorites is when you're talking about relationships, there was a newlywed game that had to do with couples that had been married over 50 years. And so Bob Eubanks asks the women, when was the last time your husband said, I love you? So the first one says, I think it was probably last week. And the next one said, it probably was this morning. And then the third woman says, it was when we got married. What? When we got married. So they bring the husbands back out again. And not surprisingly, all three of the couples, they've been married a long time, so their stories jived, right? But when they got to the third one, Bob Eubanks looks at the man and he says, the last time you told your wife that you loved her was when you got married? He said, yeah. When we did our wedding vows, I told her I love you. And I also said, if I ever change my mind, I'll let you know. And I just thought that was another way you could possibly be. But can't you just picture this woman after 50 some years of marriage waiting every day to see if this is the day that he finally comes clean and says, no, it's not going on for me anymore. And I'm off.
It was a mistake.
Yep. I know it's been 50, but I don't want to spend another day. Unbelievable. So it's been a really kind of an interesting time. And I got to go through two kind of major events in my world. One is, and the first one I think that was most important was Holy Week and Easter weekend, which since I've been a very small boy, it was always a big deal in my house. We always got our glad rags on, and my mom and dad got all dressed up in their finest, and the three sisters and three brothers got on their finest, and we all had hand-me-down suits from cousins, and the girls all had their little Easter bonnets and everything. And off we would go, the six of us, actually the eight of us, to mass on Easter Sunday. And it was always such a remarkable thing how all the white lilies and all the other people were so dressed up. And it was, kind of a requirement that women cover their head, back in the 1960s, especially the early 1960s when they came into the church. So they all had on their Easter bonnets, and I can remember that vividly. Then we'd get home, and then we'd help my littlest sister, who at that time was probably about 2 years old, walk around the yard and fill up her Easter basket with all of the colored eggs. And then after she had a full basket of eggs, the older ones would go looking for ourselves. But it was just kind of a ritual. It was kind of fun. So that's the first thing. And I won't get into as deep a detail with the second thing. The second thing has to do with men's and women's basketball. And I know you're not necessarily a very big fan. However, we do have the unique situation of right now, both of our UConn men and women's teams going real deep in both of their tournaments. They're still alive at this moment. Women play at 9 o'clock tonight in the round of 16, and the men are in the final four next Saturday. So these are the times that I enjoy, no matter what kind of physical condition I'm in. Staying up late and sleeping in until 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning to recover myself, and that's what I was doing last week. It was kind of interesting.
Hmm.
And
Well,
how
I
did
think,
your week go?
yeah, you spoke about two things which I can't like really relate to. One was Easter and Holy
I know.
Week, and but I did love hearing about you helping your little sister, because I do think that's so sweet and just kind of demonstrates what people are like. And those are the things that form you and kind of mold you as into the person you are. Those kinds of circumstances or those kinds of memories or situations. And I am not a basketball fan now. I don't really watch many sports on TV, but I do appreciate on a really profound level the amount of work that takes going in and being ready to do something like that. Like, I think there is just so I think that in that way, there is a true appreciation of, you know, of navigating sports to that, or being so good at something.
Well, you know something, Jan? So here's what I kind of picked up over the last 3 weeks, watching far more basketball than any human being should. And some days it was 12 hours, and the last couple of days, because the herd is thinning on the men's side, it was probably 6 hours of basketball yesterday. But this is what I noticed, and I said to my wife, I said, "Do you realize, you look at these different games that are going on? You've got, between the two teams, 25, 30 men or 30 women. Every last one of these were the very best in their high school. Every,
Hmm.
they were the best probably in their conference. Many of them were all state in the 50 different states. And they come here and they compete together, and none of that matters. What matters is how well can they communicate with each other, and how well can they make their bodies form into one unit that can cause the ball to go in the basket more times than the other guys can."
Well, I mean, I think about, health always like that. It is a nothing in our, nothing in our bodies works in isolation. And if
Right.
you think about it, none of us in general work in isolation on anything. I mean, it's all at every moment of every day. It's a given conglomeration of multiple people who participate, and whether that be the person who serves you coffee or the person who, makes sure that, is somewhere on a panel, making sure you still have electricity or running water. I mean, none of us functions at all in isolation.
Correct. Correct. There's a, Werner Erhard always used to say that the whole of life is a conversation. And whenever you think that you're having a conversation with yourself, you're not. You're having thoughts, and that's not the same. Being in conversation with somebody else is where action takes place and where things get moved and where the world changes. And oftentimes, the thoughts that you're having where you think you're speaking with yourself, you're really not. These are leftover conversations with other people. And to your point, it's where residual, we call them time bombs, you know, where all of a sudden there's an aha moment later on. But if you think about anything that's worth doing, um, there's a sharing of it. There's the exchanging of ideas and methods and all that sort of thing. And especially in medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to somebody this morning. I was having a meeting, and we were talking about, conversations and leadership and conversations with other people. And I was saying that I do think it begins with having having a conversation with yourself. And when I say conversation, it's like knowing yourself and, getting in touch with, you know, some what you might call basic aspects of yourself. But, because I do think that that navigates the way you are in the world and the way you show up. But I think that, even with ourselves, it's not, we have to listen, to our, and if you think about it with the body, we have to listen to the body to pay attention. We can choose not to. Yes, we can, you know, it's an option, you know, that
Well,
people do.
and I'm also thinking, how many times have we talked about the 80 some thousand theoretical, thoughts that a human being potentially has on a daily basis, and the ability to discern, and to have an enlightened listening to the ones that are important and the ones that are not. But I love what you're saying. And there's lots of room for different interpretation of how a conversation takes place. But it's, for instance, in writing code, I don't know if you've ever looked into that at all, but the basic uh, premise is that you start by writing an argument, a sentence in code that asks a question of the operating system is called an argument. And then that argument gets answered by something, and it's looking for an answer to its question.
Yeah, I
So
mean, that's the story of the Talmud.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's what they did. They basically came up with scenarios or situations, and then they would debate as to what the answer was. But, you know, nobody was sitting there. I mean, it was questions they were probably asked over time and everything. But it's basically writing code.
well, and that's the important part of it, is that the people who are having the conversation aren't probably the first ones it's not their first time in the
Mhm.
temple, if you will.
That's
Uh,
right. That's right.
it's kind of, especially in Judaism, it's probably a good idea to remain silent until someone asks you a question directly.
But yeah, I mean, it was all stuff that they would sit there and they would have conversations about, like what would happen if this, or if somebody came, or if this was the situation, and just would go on and on.
Yeah, that I kind of like, examining different spiritual practices.
Hmm.
And not all of them are religious. Some of them are absolutely not religious. They are from a completely different place, except for they are um, inviting a situation where something new will come to them in terms of knowing themselves, which is what I heard you say earlier. And one of the neat spiritual practices, which some could argue that it's religious, and others might say that no, it comes from a slightly different place, but it's done with a religious background, where we're actually in a place of worship. For instance, have you ever been in a at a Shaker or a Quaker meeting?
I've been to, like, you know, meeting house, or, but I've never participated or gone to a service, for example, or a.
I've been to one. I got invited to one that was just outside of New York City, in New Jersey, and it was remarkable. First of all, only half the seats were filled, and there was a space in between all the folks that were there. And they more or less sat quietly until someone was moved to speak.
Mm,
And what was really kind of neat is, of course, all I could do was take it in and kind of listen to somebody saying a sentence out loud, and then everybody else kind of making a murmur noise in agreement, you know. Um, but those situations where you get into a conversation where folks are answering each other and kind of one up each other, making a point. That would be the booby prize, at a Quaker meeting. There's
Mm,
nothing to win. There's only to put something into the space that would be empowering and that would be enlightening to all the other listeners.
mm.
It's called responsible speaking. I recommend it.
Well, I love that. I mean, I love that whole idea or thought of, you know, only participating in a conversation when you have where you have something useful to share. Do you share?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember who said it. It seems like it might be something that Mark Twain said, or uh, maybe Will Rogers, or maybe even somebody else. But the point was, never open your mouth to break the silence unless you're going to improve on it.
Hmm. Well, I think there's a lot of power in that, and if you go back to like ancient texts where you have the gates of speech and things like that. Like, is it necessary? Is it useful? Is it kind?
Is it true?
Is it true? I think a lot of people would be silent a lot of the time if they actually let it filter through that. you know, and there wouldn't be like we wouldn't be like sound bombarded. It might be like the opposite. Where somebody chiming in with something to say would probably be much more um, you know much more much rarer.
There's this competitive nature sometimes, especially in academics, to especially early on, in any of the classes that I would take, they would all start out the same. On the first day of the semester, nobody wants to volunteer and say anything out loud for fear, not for fear of getting it wrong, but for fear of looking like they're too smart or looking like they're too this or too that. It was all, image. But usually in the good classes, by the fourth or fifth get together, people were competing for airtime. And in a couple of can you imagine being in a 200s level class where the professor says, I'm sorry, there are too many of you that are too excited about this conversation. You're going to have to raise your hand and I will call on you one at a time so that we can orchestrate the listening.
Hmm.
And I had a couple of really good, um, especially a poli sci professor. Once he said, I can see by your faces that while this person over here is speaking, you're all thinking about what you're going to say next.
Hmm.
And he said, I will bet you $1 right now that I know how that would turn out. He said, so let's stop everything. Write down the thought you're just thinking. Every single person in the class did so. And so they all thought he was going to guess as to who would get it right. Who would have the right answer for the next thing to say.
Hmm.
And what he said was, he said, I bet that 60% of you are going to say something that has nothing to do with what this person was talking about. And then he had each of us stand up and read out loud what we wrote. And it got to the point where we were just laughing out loud.
Right. I love
And,
that.
and he said, so what's the moral of this? Why did we stop a class to do this exercise and demonstrate this to you?
Hmm.
And once again, he waited for people to to guess and say what it was. And that he said the most important thing for you to do is to listen for understanding.
Hmm.
Don't listen for the words. Take in all the information you possibly can: body posture, emotion, facial expression. Take it all in. Use that all to do full contact listening. And
Hmm.
then when you think you have a good idea of what that person is saying, ask them if what you think they said is what they meant for you to hear.
Right.
And
Well, I mean, I actually love that, and I have a friend who constantly says those words. Like you're basically in this. this whole realm of active listening of this is what I heard. Is this what you meant?
Yeah.
And 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 I think I've worked quite hard over the past I want to say year at being a better listener. And trying to curb myself. I think, especially when you tend to have a like catch things very quickly. It's almost like you go through a series of steps in your head before the person has even actually finished. Like you finish what they're saying before they finish what they're saying, and kind of pausing and stepping back and saying, "Oh my gosh," let the person finish. Let them try. I mean, and then obviously, if you don't understand, you don't understand. And so then you say something, to that effect. Could you explain that a different way? Or I'm not sure I'm following you. Because it's better to do that than pretend that you understand.
Well,
Or,
those are mechanical, and you want to understand also that in order to get to a mastery stage, you have to have crutches, you know, because we're all basically cripples when it comes to certain types of activities, especially social interactions and those kinds of things, where we've spent most of our time trying to figure out the next thing that we're going to say that will wow people, as,
right. Oh yeah,
as opposed
absolutely.
to really getting into a conversation, right?
No, absolutely. It's almost how to wow people, how to, I don't know. I mean, people do it for multiple reasons, how to feel important, how to feel like you know things. I mean, the other thing, like everything. And that's the other thing is um, you know, is spending time with people you know, who basically somebody said to me the other day, her grandmother used to always say, you want to be in a room where the majority of people are as smart, if not smarter than you. And I said, I actually would take it in general. You want to be in a room where everyone is, where everybody is smart or knows things that you don't, knows things that you don't know. I mean, that's kind of like to me, that's where the excitement happens.
Yeah. There's a Facebook meme that crossed my path and I post this week. And it basically said, it's impossible for a fool to have wisdom simply because they're so busy speaking, they'll never listen and take on board what another person thinks. Whereas a wise person will listen to everyone, especially the fool.
Hmm.
And there have been times in my life where I really thought that I was in the presence of somebody who was listening far past the point where the speaker was interesting, and I really thought that they were kind of doing it, to not offend or to give them a false sense of value or something of that nature. But the older that I've got, the more I've started to see that how a person speaks, especially the ones that take forever to get to a point, those are the ones where I would used to have been tapping my foot and looking at my watch and thinking to myself, well, here's 4 or 5 minutes I'll never get back. And what I really found was is that sometimes you have to listen to all the chaff, before you can get to the gold.
Absolutely. And I was on conversation this morning, and as you're saying this, it just reminded me. So the person was late and then got on and was apologizing or whatever, and kind of shared why, what had happened, why were late. And there was something about I think, the vulnerability that they shared around that, which one is I had the utmost respect for. It was just like, and it's so interesting because we got into a discussion this week about responsibility and um And I mean, it was regarding health, but there was something about the way he said it, and this person said it, and then also articulated it. I mean, made it so much, just was a true practice in compassion for on my part, because normally I tend to, yeah, I don't know, but I don't usually hang out waiting for someone to join a meeting. I kind of just send them a message and say, did you make a mistake? Did you forget about the time? Kind of thing. And not in a negative way, but just, I'm not going to sit with my Zoom room open for, hours on end. But just when he came in, the fact that one is, I think he did take responsibility, and two, this whole feeling of, I don't know, just like he was really genuine and authentic. It was just, I think that takes a courage, because sometimes we're actually trained not to let, especially in the business world, not to let those softer sides show, you know.
Yeah, say some more about that, if you will, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the business world in general, we are trained to kind of do, accomplish, get things done if we have a job. And I think it's gotten better since COVID, but that life should not get away of the bottom line, basically. And uh, y- and I think that that's fine and dandy if you're working with a series of computers. But um, if you're working with human beings, you know, it doesn't work like that necessarily. We're not um, we're not robots.
Well, the testy thing about us is we don't all use the same programming language. So sometimes there has to be a series of questions asked before you even know what the conversation is.
Hmm.
And that's a different thing for human beings than it is with robots and computers. And I know a little bit about computers, not quite as much as about robots as I do about computers. But since I've made my livelihood being a computer expert for now going on 45 years, I have a healthy respect for what I don't know. Let's put it that way. I'm still able to learn something new almost every single day, and that's
Oh,
very cool.
absolutely. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that there is something so profound and so deep about really, taking that attitude of, can I learn something new today that I didn't know yesterday?
Yeah, there's a lot of wise people. I mean, what's really cool about it is I don't have to look very hard these days to find inspirational quotes. But one of my favorite ones back in the day, where I would have to read a book or something of that nature, or at least some kind of a periodical, was we'll get back on basketball again just for a minute, because John Wooden, who coached the UCLA Bruins basketball team that had greats on it like Bill Walton and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, also known as Lou Alcindor, and a bunch of other really great basketball players from the 60s and 70s. He won. I think he won the world champion, or the at that time would have been the NIT, the National Invitational Tournament, and then when the NCAA came out later. But the point is that he was a molder of men in his own terms. His job was not to win basketball games. His job was to fashion really, really good human beings.
Hmm.
And to that end, he was always speaking to the lowest common denominator. And he would have to keep saying to these folks, especially when some of them got to be really good at the basketball craft, to take them down and to get them to really kind of come back to earth again and realize that they were human, when he would ask them what they're really good at. And then he'd ask them, what are you really bad at? And he said, when they answered the question, they had a very narrow answer. I'm really good at, blocking out the baseline and keeping people from scoring baskets because I'm 7 foot tall, somebody like Lou Alcindor. And he would come back to them and he would say, and you do realize that what you learn after you know everything, that's the good stuff.
Well, as you were talking, Bill, what was coming to my mind was this whole idea of a lot of times what we're really good at is also what we're really bad at
Yep.
at the same time. And how interesting is that? Like if you ask somebody what their gift is, it might not be what they're worse at, what they're bad at, but it might just be that's also what tends to give them the most issue. And it's hard for me to explain and I have to think about it, but it's really interesting that sometimes that which is your gift, for example, can be your biggest nemesis at the same time.
So let me see if I can like give this back to you in terms of basketball terms.
Okay, go
There's
ahead.
a basketball player whose name was Wilt Chamberlain. I
Oh,
believe
Wilt the
I,
Stilt. At that
Wilt.
time, at that time I did know all the players' names and stuff because I wanted to have something to talk about with my father. So I like knew every player and their number and whatever. So yeah, I wanted a uniting for like something uniting.
So here was this man, 7 feet tall, whatever the heck he was, right? Who was so intimidating down inside the paint to anybody who was trying to drive on the basket or anybody that was in his way when he was driving on the basket. I think he scored 100 points in one game back in the 1960s. And the flip side of that incredible thing that he could do was he couldn't shoot foul shots.
Right,
So
exactly.
he actually took the ball and he held it with both hands between him, spread his legs apart, and rocked back and forth with the ball going towards the basket and released it with two hands. The silliest thing you ever saw. There
Right.
were a lot of big men over the years that tried that method, and some of them, Shaq used to start that way when he was in college. But the point is to your, there's going to be something in the domain of what they really think they're the best at. That's going to show up as I still got some work to do in that area.
That's right, and it's just it's so interesting, and I think that that's why they're also good at what they do because they get if they get that, yeah, if they get that to any great extent, it's like, oh, I still have work to do on that, then it's it is the biggest opportunity they have for growth usually, because usually it's stuff that is a challenge within that gift. It's not going to be something that comes easily. So it's also the part which usually causes them or is responsible for their highest form of whatever excellence or excelling forward. And it just works like that.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, it's physical self-expression, and what you find with a lot of people that maintaining a healthy body and being injury-free is so difficult. And that's again with another sports analogy, Tiger Woods. Was projected to do so many great things and set records that would never be broken. However, no one put into the mix that his dad would pass away and that Tiger would lose his rudder and that he would become, deep in depression and drink too much and kind of put at risk everything that he had in his life, including his absolute life. And that it's taken him now almost 9 years to recover from really bad decisions that he was making.
Well,
Um,
and I think for a normal person, life happens, and we have part stuff in our body that just happens, or we don't come with a rule book or with an instruction manual.
yeah,
So I'll use myself as an example. Was I have pretty severe scoliosis curvature. So being a long distance runner was probably not the best thing for me to do.
Right.
No one ever told me that. And partly because my pelvis is rotated, my hips are rotated, and my rib cage is rotated. So putting on like miles and miles on hard pavement was probably not a great thing. But no
Sounds
one ever
painful.
said, yeah, I mean, it ended up being painful and I ended up having to stop running.
Yeah.
And but I don't think anybody, I would have been in a much better, if I was going to even because I used to do races just for something to train for and see if I could get a better time. I
Yeah.
would probably have been a much better runner for 5Ks or 10Ks, which were like 3 to 5 miles versus marathons, which is what I was training for. So, but we don't come with an instruction manual. Like, no one ever told me that. And so I did it. And then, yes, I paid the price for it, you know, but I mean, it also made me a better teacher and better at a lot of things and working with people who had injuries. I mean, so that was a gift that came from it. But it wasn't like we don't come with an instruction book that says, okay, like this is how you work. It would be nice and easy if we did, to some extent.
Yeah. Or even a mentor,
Right.
I don't know how it was in your family, but my neither of my parents went to college. Um, not Neither one of them ever set foot in college before they sent me. And of course, what was the most important thing to them, as far as I was concerned, that I go to college.
Hmm.
Now, they hadn't had an opportunity to put much thought into that, or kind of figure out like what would I do once I got to college. Uh, a dog chasing a car, as they say. When you catch it, what are you going to do with it? And so neither one of them had any expertise in terms of like, this is how you get yourself into a position where you're going to be accepted, at a school of your choice. And this is how you decide what will be a school of your choice, like what you want to be when you're actually an adult and making money for your efforts and all of that. Both of them had kind of been like water flowing into a crack, and my dad just went wherever there was an opportunity to grow.
Hmm.
And that was one of the things that I took away from him. And you know what, Jan, I didn't need a college degree to excel in that area, because he was such a good role model in saying that 90% of life is just that you never give up.
Right. I mean, my father was was a big academic, kind of thing. So he did go to college and did, you know, almost got his doctorate, so he was very scholastically oriented.
Right.
But I think there's always like you took that as, you know, well, I still learned a lot from my father kind of thing. And then negatively and positively, I think that, you are trained, or do learn from your parents to some extent. And there were things that I didn't do. I mean, my father also was in a job I think that he didn't like for many years because he was promoted out of what he loved, which they do. And then all of a sudden he was working in an area which didn't like, but you didn't leave a job back then that was like really, you just didn't. We were talking about that the other day. You stayed at a place for 30, 40 years because that's what people did. And so, but it taught me other things. And that was just, you know, the fact that I wonder often what would have happened had he actually got to do what he loved.
Yeah.
And so,
I wondered the same thing. I really did, and it's kind of neat, and at the same time a little bit melancholy, that where my dad was the best at giving me advice was probably after he retired.
mhm,
When he could look back and he could be, and here's the really strange things. I know for a lot of folks out there, like my wife, when she was born, her dad was 53 years old and her mom was 35. So there was a huge communication gap just based on time frames. And can you
mhm,
imagine two people in their midlife having a brand new baby, and But that's what they wanted to do. It's why they had gotten married 2 years before, and that was a culmination. But my dad was different. He married my mother, and the math works out that it was actually 13 months that I was born after they were. No, not 9. It was 10 months after after they were married that I was born. So the long and the short of it was he was uh, he was 17 years old when they got married. He was just turned 18 when I was born. And
Wow.
so when I was going to college, he was still figuring out how he was going to make his life work. And
Mm,
although he had had some success, he really couldn't articulate yet what he was doing from a repetitive, kind of set of skills that he was employing to get promoted and to be in a position where he was recognized and given more responsibility, and then followed through and was worthy of that extra responsibility by doing a great job no matter what they gave him to do. He couldn't
mhm,
say stuff like that until after he retired. So he wasn't useful to me, in the whole idea of what are you going to college for. He just basically said they're hiring engineers like candy all over the United States. You'll get a very good job being an engineer, Bill. So I had uh, a strong math background. I did well on the SATs, very well. I Without studying, I aced my way through math all the way through high school. There was really nothing that we did that was even a challenge for me at that point. And so, okay, I'll do that. But I also was pretty good at music. I was a singer, and I also was good at art. I could draw and I could paint and I could do all sorts of things like that. And I really loved people. I loved the socialization.
mhm.
And I think a lot of that came because while my dad was moving around, I was very small. By the time I was in third grade and we settled down in Ledyard, I had gone to 9 different schools across the United States and lived in 13 different homes by the time by the time I got into high school. So I got pretty good at saying, "Hi, I must be going. Hello, I must be going." Because my mom was moving us once a year.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting that within those years, which you might call like the formative years,
Right.
so much of what you see, obviously, and it makes sense, influences who you become and what you do. I mean, I was good in the sciences, and and I was good in sciences and math. And had I been able to do a double major, which I couldn't do at the time, I probably would have I majored in biology, but I probably would have minored in math because I loved math. And it was always very easy to me,
Yeah.
also. It was not, my roommates at the time used to laugh because I would do these really complex, equations and everything, and the music would be blasting, and I was in like another zone. Like I didn't hear a thing. I was just like in a zone, and I loved it, but it wasn't possible, and so that was okay. But it just, you- just there's something about what happens during those years and what you're around, that molds, who you are, what's important, and then sometimes not. Like, I mean, I didn't, I ended up doing something that was not in my parents' plan, that's for sure. But, you know,
Well,
that's
so of course, if I was going to go to engineering school, it couldn't just be any engineering school.
Mhm.
I only applied because my guidance counselor said, "Oh, we'll get you into somewhere, Bill." It's like it was always a left-handed compliment. But then the other guidance counselor, who was this beautiful woman who I will never forget for the rest of my life, she said, "You have a story to tell. You can do anything." She said, "I've watched you grow and prosper since seventh grade. You're going places, okay? So don't you listen to anybody who tells you you're second best." And so that was kind of cool. And so I applied to 3 different places. I applied to UConn, I applied to Marietta, Ohio, and I also applied to the University of Colorado Engineering School. I got into all three. Which one did I choose? The most expensive one, which was Colorado, with tuition and room and board. It was like $4,200 a year, which was a lot of money in 1971. Looking forward to 1972. But in the same year, it had been Playboy magazine's #1 party school in the United States. So that those two things kind of worked at odds with each other in terms of being distracted, if you will. So I didn't really give my engineering career a lot of attention for that first year. I spent a lot of time doing other activities, becoming very good at other activities, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it's those positive encounters or could be those negative encounters, which, are the impetus for growth or what you do. I
Yeah.
mean, I was told that I shouldn't bother applying to college because I wasn't smart enough.
Well, how you doing?
Well, every degree I got after that, it was kind of like eat your words. Like that's literally how I felt. I felt like I should have sent it to the person the who was actually my guidance counselor and my principal at the time. And I felt like I should have sent it to him with like a little things like eat your words. And then, you know, and then realizing that, what he said really wasn't, true, but it took me a long time to get there, you know.
And
Took
that's
me a
always
long
the best, in my opinion. You know that when it comes easy, there doesn't usually seem to be as much long-term progress. But when you learn how to master the mundane, year in and year out, it's easy to go past to that second degree and the third degree. Or how many do you have altogether?
I have a well, I have a I have a bachelor's and then I have a master's in immunology and infectious disease and a diploma in tropical medicine.
Not
So
too shabby.
it was quite a lot of schooling and quite a lot of advanced classes and stuff. And like I said, every degree I got after that one, it was like, I guess you were wrong,
Yeah.
like kind of thing. And so and then letting it go. I mean, it's just so interesting how we mature and we grow. It's like, and are you open to that? And then just realizing that, that's not how part of it was that wasn't how I wanted to judge people by like how many degrees they had.
Right.
It wasn't how I wanted to navigate the world, you know. And so I just, I think you mature and you realize that, for whatever the circumstance or whatever like you talked about it, is like if you get like, people don't go to school and do go to school for multiple reasons, none having to do with how bright they are,
Yeah.
life circumstances, finances, you know family responsibilities, like all these kinds of things you know which influence that. And so being so narrow like that just didn't resonate with me.
It's while you're saying that, the intense focus. I'm looking at my two younger brothers, and my the one who's 2 years younger than me. He came close to failing the first grade. I was always got A's all the way through grammar school. It just was, I was wired for it. Let's put it that way. And he wasn't. He processed information differently. It had nothing to do with who was more intellectually adept or anything like that. It's just that he didn't have the kind of photographic memory that I had when I was that age. I remembered amazing things. I had amazing vision. So I constantly was internalizing my environment. If somebody said something to me on Tuesday and then said something different on Thursday, I would know that they weren't saying the same thing, etc.
Hmm.
Now, David, God bless him, wasn't like that for him at all. And they had mid-year, they said, we're really thinking about sending him from the second grade back to the first grade. I think that was the story. And we had moved around to three different schools for him in 3 years. And he just didn't take to that really well. He cried every time he had to leave a teacher. He was very sensitive that way and wonderful, as a matter of fact. But my dad made a project out of sitting with him every single night when he got home from work. He'd say, "Okay, what are we doing tonight, Dave? Where's the homework? Let's get this done." And he did that, until David had two good report cards in a row. But Dave got, my dad's undivided attention every single evening, because that's the sheep that needed, or the lamb that needed to be brought back to the herd again and to be made whole.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that imprinting ever left the two of them. I think that was a bond for them, the rest of my dad's life for sure, and I'm sure for David as well.
It's beautiful. I mean, that's really a beautiful example and story. I mean, I think it's really powerful. And there's so much to be said for, I don't know, those kinds of stories and how they, and how we are in our own lives.
Yeah.
Just because, what kind of parent are you? Do you show up to be? And yes, and parents they're human beings, kind of thing, with their issues and whatever they're going through at the moment and
Yeah.
whatnot. But, you know, that obviously was important that your father felt it was important enough that your father felt that it was time that was just so valuable. So,
Well, if it was gonna happen, it had to be him, because my mom dropped out of high school in 10th grade to marry my dad. And then, of course, when she should have been graduating from high school, she was in the hospital having me, you know,
mhm,
in,
right.
March
No, absolutely.
March 21st. And so, had my dad only gone to school the way that he had and never had any further education, the Air Force trained him how to learn, and he took to it. I mean, it was really, really amazing what with the whole electronics field, which was just brand new, and they really didn't even have a whole lot of things that had electronics in them. But it was a huge leap forward after World War II for things to go from tubes and different types of mechanical relays and what have you, and in the late 1950s, the ICs, what we would have been wowed in the 1970s, transistors were the big deal in the 1950s. And so that's where he really learned how to learn, and that made him an expert teacher,
Hmm.
because that's what he wound up doing as a supervisor, building Atlas missiles, and a supervisor building submarines. So he got to be very good at showing people how to master certain things, and he was a very good teacher to my brother.
Yeah, and yeah, it's just, I mean, I think it's remarkable. Um, because I think it is, some of it's life circumstances and some of it's um, life happen, it really is the way life unfolds for you and how that, and are you willing to step into that, you know, and kind of say, okay, well, I've been given this and I have a choice here.
Yeah,
I can either let it go, like just ignore it. I guess that's not let it go, but more ignore it, or I can choose to embrace it and then let it, let it mold me, or let, and I like the word mold because I think it almost shows like the malleability that happens, the ability to like literally mold who you are.
yeah, yeah. it's a remarkable thing when human beings learn how to choose. And there was a seminar that I went through back in the 90s. And so there's a conversation, kind of a lead in about choice. And what do we mean by choice? And what's the power in choosing, and all that. So the seminar leader, stood at the front of the room and held two hands out. And he said, in this hand, I have vanilla ice cream. In this hand, I have chocolate ice cream. And so whoever he had gotten up to come interact with him said, vanilla or chocolate, choose. And of course they said, okay, chocolate. And he'd say, well, that's a good choice. So let's do it again. It goes, vanilla or chocolate, choose. This time the person says vanilla. Nobody knows what the hell the point of this whole thing is, but we're all cracking up. And so, but at its simplicity, and then the person says, yeah, vanilla. And he says, well, that's a pretty good choice. And now he like goes through that about half dozen times. And then he puts one hand behind his back. He says, chocolate, choose. What? Okay, obviously you're not paying attention here. So we'll do this again. Okay, we're doing an exercise on choice, and I'm going to give you a choice. Okay, and he goes, chocolate, choose. And they go, and this goes on for 5 minutes or so, and finally he says, chocolate, choose, and the person goes, okay, I'll take the chocolate. And he said, life oftentimes gives us one choice. Choose what you got. And you said it so neatly by saying allowing it to mold you, and the malleability of being able to choose what seems like a pretty awful deal. But there's so much power that's associated with choosing what you got.
Well, I don't remember who said, the root of like the cause of misery is basically wanting what we don't have, and kind of living in that space. And I mean, just as a practical example, because it's very concrete, if you want really curly hair and you have straight hair, you can do everything you want, sort of like chemically or whatever. But eventually, most of the time, you kind of like sit there and say, okay, yes, I could put all, I could chemically make myself have curly hair, but after a while, I think that almost gets tiring. And it's kind of like it's a lot of energy, whether that, and you think about energy as being, money or whatever it is. It's a lot of expenditure for something that, for whatever reason, I was not gifted to have curl. You know what I mean? My genetics is not that I'm going to have curly hair. And I think sometimes we fight that kind of like those obvious things, right? It's like, where can we just be happy with what we have?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think it's an acquired taste. But until people are like open to the idea, then it's demonstrated to them the notion of there's something awful going on here that has to be dealt with. It's denial, procrastination. Um, can I get someone else to do it? You know,
It's
deflection.
it's it's challenging.
Yeah,
I think we resist. That's really hard for me because most of the time people aren't going to place themselves in a situation where something is challenging. I mean, you know, we all want, in general, people want, we want as human beings, we want the easy way.
yeah. At least the one that doesn't hurt. At least.
Absolutely.
So here we are again. We've managed to entertain each other for another hour. Ain't it great?
It is good. It is that. It is very good.
Anything you'd like to say to kind of like put a bow on top or a cherry, if you will?
I don't know. Maybe just look at your life and just notice, like, what do you fight? Like, or um, yeah, what do we fight or what do we resist is a good word. And can we just see if we can be a little softer around that? That's it.
Yeah. I think back to a comic strip in the 1960s called Pogo. And I can't tell you what the animals were, but they were very simply drawn.
Mm-hmm.
And they almost always had the most profound and wise things to say. But one of their favorite sayings was, "We have met the enemy and he is us."
Right. Exactly.
So
So,
with all that in mind, we're heading into a season of rebirth, with everything coming back to life, greening up again. The flowers are going to be out shortly and all the rest of it. Let's see if y'all and if I can join you, spend a little bit of time growing some new green shoots here. I'm pretty long in the tooth. I had my 70th birthday just a little over 10 days ago. And that's a remarkable thing in my family because we're the first generation to get a lot of my cousins and me, to the age of 70. There were several generations that didn't get here. So my point is this. Um, Thank you, Jan. I appreciate you. I'm awfully glad that you're my partner in these conversations, and I love it. I also want you to know that because you're in the world, my life works.
oh, thank you, Bill. Back at you. Wishing everybody well. Feel free to connect with us outside of this space if you feel so inclined. Have a conversation. We'd love to hear from you. And have a great week, everybody.
Absolutely. Everyone, bye for now and take good care of yourself because it's a dangerous world out there. We love you and we'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.